What's going on, everyone? Happy Sunday. This week in trading is going to be very good. We got to go in there optimistic, positive, expecting the best to happen. All right. Thank you guys so much for all of your likes, your comments, subscribes. We're going to make a lot of money this week. All right. So without further ado, let's get started with the video. And very quickly, I share all of my buy and sell signals completely for free on Twitter every single day. So that is another opportunity that you guys can see what I'm doing. And I have a 75% documented success rate, and I keep track of all of the trades every single day. Now let's talk about the SPY. So currently, you can see that the MACD has crossed above on the MACD level. This blue line has crossed above, yet we have failed to still cross above the 618% fib level that I said was very important for us to cross above, because currently we're still in a bear flag formation technically. Okay, so until we can start closing above this 618% fib level, this bear flag, which is a very bearish formation, is still going to be intact. Okay, so we need to see the SPY close above that level very soon. Overall, we called the bottom here. I posted multiple buy signals all throughout here on this day over here on the 20th. Those worked out perfectly. And of course, we continued going on higher. So right now, I would not be surprised to see the SPY retrace back down to 438 or approximately 439 level. Consolidate a bit more, which would also coincide with this trend line here. And then essentially create a bull flag formation, which is bullish, right? And then break on above. So I don't think we're going to be able to sustain a straight up move upward, obviously. So a retrace back down to 438, 439, which would also coincide with this blue trend line that was acting as clear levels of resistance and support all throughout here. That would be a very good opportunity to get into longs. But that all depends on whether or not the China situation with Evergrande is going to be reconciled, right? If it's not going to be reconciled, then this entire move here is just a dead cat bounce, literally, because we fell so sharply. A sharp move to the upside is warranted. But if the overall macroeconomic news doesn't get any better, then this move is not justified and will end up falling lower. But yeah, so a good place to buy would be around 438 to 440 potentially to get into calls, in my opinion, for the SPY, right? Overall, the RSI is now like above 50, which is a good sign, but there's still tons more room to go for both indices. And this is a very strong reversal, but we need to see a close above the 618% fib level at 444. Once we see it close above that level, then it's going to be much higher chance that we'll continue on higher. So there's the SPY. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the IWM. So here's a chart of the IWM. Don't get overwhelmed by all of the lines. Just look at this right here. So the MACD, you can see, crossed above much higher than the SPY. So you can see that the MACD here is much more overbought now than the SPY is. And we had a much bigger reversal here as well. One other thing that I want to show you guys is that the IWM is also having trouble closing above this 0.618% fib level of this move. Okay, so it closed above it yesterday, the day before on Thursday, but then on Friday it fell down and closed above the 50% fib. So once more, this 618% fib level is very important now on the IWM as well. Needs to cross and close above 224 essentially for the IWM. Okay, but of course, very similar to the SPY, a retest to around 220 to 221 would be a good opportunity to load back up into calls. And very similar to the SPY, this would create a bull flag formation, giving some room to consolidate at the lows here and then move on higher. But again, very similar to the SPY, it all depends on Evergrande and whether or not the overall macroeconomic situation can be handled, because that is a very terrible situation for China to be in, but I'm assuming China is not going to allow one of their biggest companies to fall over. Most likely what will end up happening is there will be some more FUD and like fear in the markets, but then I do think China is going to bail the company out, and the markets will resume up as normal, in my opinion. So very simply, there's the analysis on the IWM. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the NASDAQ. All right, so here's a chart of the QQQ, and you can see that the MACD on the NASDAQ has not actually crossed above. So if you can go back, you can see that the SPY and the IWM, their MACDs crossed well above, yet the NASDAQ has not even crossed above yet. So that is good potential news for a potential close above this 618% fib level at 374.43. So if the NASDAQ can start showing more strength and close above 374.50, that might show more strength for the overall moves on the SPY and the IWM. They might end up following the NASDAQ. But given the fact that the NASDAQ still has a lot more room to the upside, and we have not yet crossed above resistance, means that there's more room. So it's good. But the one issue with this is that the 30-year yield is really starting to look terrible. And of course, the 30-year yield and the bonds and the 10-year yield, they have a lot to do with the overall stock market. But before we go into that, essentially, if the NASDAQ does begin to dip similar to the IWM and the SPY, 370 would be a good opportunity to get into more calls. And then, you know, if we consolidate above 369, 370, then we can move on higher on the NASDAQ. All right. So aside from that, I mean, that's very simply the analysis. All three indices are creating bear flag formations, and they are at the point of whether they're going to fall lower or whether they're going to break above and start closing above, consolidating and breaking up higher. So we're at a very interesting point in the market right now. And for now, we just have to wait and see what happens on the grander macroeconomic scale internationally with China and the other banks. All right. So there's the analysis on the NASDAQ. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the bonds. So here is a chart of the 30-year yield. And you can see that we closed below multiple important layers of support. And the 30-year yield has a lot to do with the NASDAQ. So if the 30-year yield is bearish, then the NASDAQ is not going to be as bullish. Okay? And essentially, this is not a good sign at all. It means that investors are wary of the long-term strength in the market. So that's why the NASDAQ takes a hit, because growth-related stocks, people invest in internet growth-related stocks, etc., because the longer-term horizon of those stocks is much more profitable. So the 30-year yield falling is not a good sign for the overall stock market. And especially since we're closing below multiple important layers of support, that's also not a good sign. But even though we did have two huge red days and we're starting to close below multiple layers of support, the overall stock market did not collapse, right? Which is a good sign. So for now, we just need to see how low the 30-year yield does fall. Right, so right now we can see that it's trading outside of the lower level of the B band, very overextended to the downside. And you know, you can also see every time it's been overextended to the downside or the upside, it always reverts back to the average, back to the mean. So we might fall down lower again tomorrow, but then eventually there's going to be some sort of a bounce. Not that strong necessarily, right? But there will be a bounce. We'll fall back into the Bollinger Bands, and then we need to see how the NASDAQ reacts. But overall, this week is going to be very important, especially since the 30-year yield is showing so much weakness. But that bounce on the 30-year yield, we need to see how the NASDAQ responds to that bounce. And yeah, I mean, this is going to be a very interesting week. But overall, we're gonna trek through everything. We're gonna make beautiful moves, and we're gonna make a lot of money. So yeah, there's a 30-year yield. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the 10-year yield, because the 10-year yield has a lot to do with the Russell 2000 or the IWM. So the 10-year yield is breaking out. So it's doing very, very well. You can see that this is a bull flag formation. We crossed above the bull flag formation, and we're breaking on higher. This move here is the reason why the IWM was the leading indice. So the IWM has a lot to do with the economically sensitive stocks, shorter term stocks, as well as value stocks. So in the short term right now, the IWM was the leader because of this huge move. So if you can see, we skyrocketed really, really high on the IWM from these lows here compared to the NASDAQ. Obviously, because the weakness in the 30-year yield, all right, and the strength in the 10-year yield, all right. So going back to the 10-year yield, you can see there's clear strength here, and now essentially we are overextended outside of the upper level here. We might go higher one more day, but then we are going to retrace back. So when we retrace back here, that will most likely coincide with the 30-year yield bouncing, right? What I was saying, you know, we might fall back down and then bounce, and then for the 10-year yield we might go higher and then fall. So those things are going to happen at the same time. So we need to see what is going to happen and how the NASDAQ, the SPY, and the IWM react when these moves do begin to happen on the 30-year and the 10-year. But overall, right now, the 10-year yield is showing the most strength. It means that the IWM is going to be the leading indice for now, depending on, you know, the strength of the bonds. So overall, there's the analysis on the bonds. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the dollar. So the dollar is, you know, consolidating a bit. It had a huge move upward, which is great, right? So now it's consolidating above support. It's working off of the overbought condition here. It still has lots of support back here down at 92.86, 92.87 area. So even if we do fall back down here, even back down to the 92.7, it's still very bullish. The dollar still looks very bullish. So overall, you can see here, this is just a giant bull flag formation. So as long as we consolidate, there's still room to break up to the upside. So that's the analysis on the dollar, the 30-year yield, and the stock market in general. Now let's go ahead and take a look at crypto. So Bitcoin, you can see, is clearly not doing that great, right? So this important trend line needs to hold, right? So currently you can see it's acting as resistance. A few days ago, we closed above it and things looked amazing, but then China released FUD saying that they weren't going to allow any transactions on Bitcoin, and that's what, like the 10th time that they've said that. So every time Bitcoin looks like it's about to do great, China just releases some terrible news and it drops the market. So it's being heavily manipulated because essentially these international, like countries in general, essentially do not want, they want to get as big of a pie as possible. They don't want Bitcoin to skyrocket into the like astronomical values without them first making sure that they're going to profit as much as possible prior to that move. Okay, so that is really just the game that all of the countries and international banks, etc., are playing. Every time Goldman Sachs or any sort of bank or hedge fund, if they respond with any sort of negative news in regards to crypto, it means that they just want cheaper prices to buy in cheaper. So for example, when JP Morgan, every time JP Morgan would respond with, oh my god, crypto is terrible, this, that, blah, 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 they were the biggest buyer of Bitcoin in the days after them saying that. So they would release some terrible news, Bitcoin would drop a lot, and then JP Morgan themselves were the highest buyer. So it's just the game. They're just playing the game. They're legally allowed to do this because crypto is not as regulated, so they're allowed to manipulate things. And essentially, I mean, it's just a game. So yeah, so currently you can see that Bitcoin is oversold on the MACD. It's moving upward on the RSI, which is great. We need to really just close above this trend line here, and today's resistance level for this trend line is going to be approximately, if we get a close above 43,750, that'd be great. And then that would point to potentially more strength to the upside, another retest of 45,000. And yeah, that would be spectacular. But yeah, this is not healthy. Like, we see, boom, a bear flag formation, it breaks to the downside, and now we're making another bear flag. So that is not good. And we just need to monitor whether or not we can close above this level, hold this level here, and start crossing above on the MACD, start showing some momentum to the upside. And yeah, that all really depends on how terrible this China news is going to be. That's why right now, swinging anything for a few days and weeks out, etc., it's very, very risky, because, you know, either China, Evergrande defaults and China doesn't buy them out, or they do. So it's literally like, if you do want to buy calls for a few weeks out, that means that you think that China is going to buy out Evergrande and bail them out. But again, you're relying on China to do that. So I'd rather just wait for this entire debacle to get situated and only share day trades where, you know, macroeconomic news does not have a huge effect. All right. So sorry for that. This is Bitcoin. Cool. Let's go ahead and take a look at Ethereum. So Ethereum, you can see that the MACD is barely crossing above here. Also, you know, just lots of terrible news from China, just a bunch of craziness going on, right? So we need to see if we can, you know, start to close above this level and then really retest 3,200 and close above that as well. We need to monitor how the MACD crosses above and how it looks, but the RSI moving upward means that there's potential room to the upside, that the momentum is moving upward. So Ethereum and Bitcoin, both the momentum on the RSI is moving upward, which is great. But I mean, really at this point, we just need to see whether we can cross above this trend line on Bitcoin. That is going to be the most important level of resistance. So this 43,800 level on Bitcoin, if we can close above that, we're solid. And that would be a great close for the beginning of this week. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys learned something from it. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like, share the video. I really appreciate all of your support, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.